What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Kelvin Sowa and I'm on a mission to help new developers understand how to build cross-platform mobile applications with React Native. In today's video, we are going to be diving into one of the most important aspects of mobile app development, which is fetching data from an API. Whether you are building a weather app, a social media platform, or an e-commerce experience, chances are you are going to need to communicate to an external server. In this video, I'll show you how to use the JavaScript Fetch API to make HTTP requests from a remote server. You'll learn how to handle asynchronous operations, manage loading and error states, and also display the data correctly on UI. Now I'm going to show you step by step how it works and how you can execute a fetch request to a remote server. This way you can be able to make all your requests on your own. Now if this sounds exciting, don't forget to like this video and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and also feel free to share this video as well. Now without any further ado, let's jump right in. Back in our workspace here, so I've gone ahead to check out to a new branch, which is the lesson 6, and it's the lesson that we are currently on. So before we start, let me go ahead and then create a new file inside the components folder here, which is going to be our lesson 6, our lesson for today, lesson 6.csx. And then let's use our favorite snippet, rnfes, like this, and change the name to lesson 6, like so. Then let's copy this, come over here, comment this out, this lesson 5 out, and then paste this in there and make sure we import it from lesson 6, components lesson 6. All right, let's get into it. All right, so when it comes to fetching data from an API, we can use the JavaScript Fetch API. We can use it to fetch the data, or we can use external tools like Axios. But in this video, we'll be focusing more on the Fetch API. Okay, so the API that we're going to be using to run this test is a dummy JSON API. You can go to your browser and I think you type in dummyjson.com like this, and then it should bring you here. I mean, it gives you access to a wide range of free resources, API resources that we can use. You can use any of these. So let's go ahead and use the products for now. So this is basically the product, the URL. You get this data here from this endpoint here. Let me prettify it, and you can now see that here we have it's in an object. So the returned object dot products is the array which contains all the data. So we are going to copy this URL, and it's going to be the endpoints that we are going to be fetching. Okay, so let's create a function here that's going to handle the fetch. So we're going to say const handle fetch here, and it's going to be an async function, an asynchronous function like this. And then we're going to say that const response is equal to await fetch. We need to await it because we're making a network request. It's equal to await, and then we pass in the URL over here. Okay, so this is where we are going to fetch it. Now we need to make sure that the response that we are getting is okay. So to do that, you're going to say if the response dot okay. If it is not okay, we are going to throw an error. We're going to say throw new error like this. We're going to pass the template literals and say error status, and then we pass in the error status with some template strings, and then we see that it's going to be the response dot status like this. Okay, so if in case the response is not valid, it's going to throw an error. Basically, that's what we've done here. Now at this point, when we get here, it means the response is okay, and then we can get the data. So we're going to say that const data is equal to the response.json, like so, and this should get us the data. Now once we get the data, what we would want to do is to just console.log it to the console like this. You could say data like this is equal, then we pass the data. Okay, so now this hopefully should fetch the data from this endpoint for us, but let's put it in a try catch block just so in case we get an error, we can catch it. So we are going to say try catch, and then we paste in the code that we just cut here, and then we are going to log the error in the console. We're going to say error like this, and then error. Now let me fix this code. Good. So now this is our function. This function is going to handle fetching the going to handle fetching the API endpoint for us. Okay, let me reload our app here like this. Okay, good. So this is lesson 6. We're on lesson 6 here. As you can see, we're on lesson 6. And this is what we have here. Now, this is the function. So to test this, we can simply grab it here and then add an on press to this text, right? Just so we test the function. Okay, so anytime you press this lesson 6, you want it to make this fetch. Now, let's test it here now. Okay, so we are getting this error here. That's because we are not awaiting the response. So I'm going to say await the response.json like this. Now let's try it again. Good. Now you can see we have the data and it's very massive. And it's hard to read what you are having here. So what the trick I mostly do is simply just put it inside json.stringify over here. Inside the log, you can say json.stringify like this. And then we pass in some parameters here, say no, and then 2. Okay, this would simply fix the object for us. So let me try this again. And then you can see we have the data over here and it has been fixed very nicely. So basically, this is the data that we are getting. And you can see that we've successfully fetched the data from this endpoint. Now, this is cool and all. We are able to fetch it and all. But then an optimized way of doing this is basically creating a hook that we can reuse to fetch the data anytime we want to fetch data, right? So even before we go into that, let's first of all do some things over here. Add some states here. Let's say use states. Pass in the use states here. And then we need to add, let's add data over here like this. Data, pass in the states here. And then it's going to be an empty array like this. We also want to add loading to this. Let's say loading like so. Let's make this small. And then we set it to false. And also let's pass in error over here like this. Let's make this error here. And then it's going to be an empty string like this. Okay, so over here, once we enter this handle fetch, what we want to do here is that we make sure that we set the loading to true. Okay, we set the loading to true over here. And then over here, once we get the data, we are going to set the data to the data dot I think this is the data that we get. So the data is an object dot products and it's going to get us the array. So data dot products like this. Okay, so data dot products. Now I'm using this question mark here because an optional chain into just in case if the data here is undefined, so that it doesn't throw an error. We handle it gracefully. That's why I'm adding this question mark here. It's called optional chaining. Okay, let me reload this. And we can clear this log here now. Okay, and then if there is an error, we are going to set the error here to error.message like this. Okay, now we can basically make this an any type here. And then finally, once everything is done, we simply set the loading here to false. Okay, good. So yeah, so basically this is what we have here. We are now checking for loading, we are checking for error, and then we are checking for the data as well. So over here, let's go ahead and then log the data. Let's say console.log data. Or even before once at this point, we already know that this function is able to fetch the data. Okay, so now let's try and render this data in a flat list. Okay, let's try and render it in a flat list like this. So let's call a flat list. And then the flat list, as we already know, it takes in a data. We pass in the data here. And then the item we want to render. Okay, so let's pass in the item, structure it over here. And then it returns a JSX. Let's pass a view over here, like so. And then create a simple view component that we can use to test this. Okay, I'm getting some errors. I think I'm moving too fast. Let's see what's going on here. Come over here, bring the view. And then, yeah, make sure we are getting the view over here. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is add a text here. And let's see, this is the data that we're getting in return. Let's get the title. Okay, let's get the item.title. So I'm going to say that we pass the item.title over here like this. Okay, why does not exist on type never? Okay, so to resolve this, we can simply come over here in the data. This is just some TypeScript error, and then pass the any over here. Okay, this should solve our problem. And let me reload this. Okay. All right. So at this point, we are not seeing anything here because this function hasn't been fetched or it hasn't been called. So we can put it in a use effect block here to make sure that it fetches on mount. Okay, so once the app loads, it should fetch the data for us. Okay, so I'm going to pass this function inside the use effect block like this. So anytime the app mounts or the app loads, it should fetch the data for us. Good. So as you can see here, we now have the titles displaying here because that's what we are passing over here in the render item. Now, if you want to learn more about flat lists, I've created in our previous episodes, I think I've created a video on flat lists where we've talked about how the data and then how to render items and many more. So you can refer back to that video if this is a little bit confusing to you. So let's continue. So now we have our data, we are passing the data. We can also pass the description if we want. Like this, we're going to see item.description like this. Yes, so now we have the title and then the description. Let's style this a little bit. First, let's see, just so it's appealing, right? Let's make this flex 1. And let's add a padding of 14. And also let's style this and give it a wrapper. Let's call it styles.wrapper. We grab this over here, come down here, pass the wrapper in here like this. And then we're going to add a padding to it. I'm going to add a padding of 14 like this. And a margin vertical of 20, like so. All right, I think 20 is a bit too much. Let's make it 10. Okay, so this is what we have here now. Now, when we come back here, let's style the title. We're going to see style title. Let's see font. Let's make it an inline style. Font weight should be 600. Font size, just to make it bold a little bit. Font size should be 12. Okay, let's make it 16. And let's add a margin bottom of 10, like this. Okay, and also for the wrapper, let's add a background. Let's add a background color of violet, like this. Let's add a border radius of, let's make it 10. 10 should be fine. All right, so right now, this is what we have. And as you can see, it is rendering the data from the API here. The data from the API is being rendered in this flat list. And you see how simple it is to make use of the JavaScript fetch API to fetch data and render it inside a flat list. Now, this is cool and all. I mean, it's working. We can just leave things over here. But one thing we can also do is actually optimize this code a bit and make it a hook that we can reuse whenever we want to make a call. Because imagine anytime we want to make a call to an API endpoint, we have to write all this code. That's not a professional way of writing code. Okay, we should make use of the dry approach, which is the don't repeat yourself. We shouldn't be repeating ourselves. So we can actually extract this code and make it as a React hook that we can use. Okay, so let's open our file explorer here, and then let's create a new folder. We're going to call it services like this. And then inside services, we're going to create a new file and name it api.tsx. Okay, so over here, we are going to create a hook. We're going to create a hook over here. I'm going to say export const use fetch like this. And then this use fetch is going to be a function that takes one parameter, which is a URL, and it's of type string here like this. Okay. Okay. So we simply make sure that, so we are getting this error. Let's actually just see, let's use the function, right? Function, let's say use fetch. And then let's pass in the URL, and it should be of type string like this. All right. So this is, you're simply creating a hook, a use fetch hook that we're going to be reusing. Now over here, you can see that we used these state hooks, right? So we can copy them here from here, and then we pass them over here. Okay, so we can have a similar thing over here. Let's import the use state like so. Good. So now that we have the use state, we can see, we can start by creating a function. Okay, create another function inside, which is going to handle fetching the data. So we're going to say const fetch data is equal to an asynchronous function like so. Okay, so here we can, first of all, like we did over here, we can start by setting the loading to true, and then let's create the try catch block like so. Or in fact, let's just go over and copy what we've done over here like this. You can copy this over here like so, and then paste it in here like this. Let's paste it over here like this. Okay, good. So all I did was to copy the try catch block we have here, and then I pasted it in here. Okay, so now we have our fetch data function here. Now we can also, since we have the fetch data, we can now call it inside a use effect block like this. And then we call the fetch data function inside here like so. And then we pass the URL in the over here, just to make sure that we refetch whenever the URL changes. So this function should run whenever the URL changes. Okay. All right. And then once everything works perfectly, we can now go ahead and then return. We can return the data, the loading, and then the error. And also we can have an optional refetch function, which when called would simply refetch the data for us. So I won't say fetch data. Okay, so it's basically going to run this function again. That's what we are passing. So we are returning the data, which is what we are getting from this function. And then also the loading, which we are setting inside this function, and then the error if we have an error. So this hook returns these options for us whenever we use it. Okay, so to use it, let's come back here. To use it, we can simply say const, open the curly braces here like this, is equal to use fetch. Let's import it. And then it's expecting one parameter, which is a string. Then we can go ahead and then pass this string over here like this. Okay, good. So like we said earlier, these are the data that it is returning. So we pass in the data, we pass in the error, we pass in the loading, and then we pass in the refetch if we want to use it. Okay, so let's clear these things over here. And then we can even go ahead and then clear the handle fetch and even this one, like so. Okay, so you see how we've actually cleaned up the whole code, and then everything we wrote here is now in one line. Now, if you want to, it means that if you want to fetch a data from a different endpoint on a different screen, we can simply just do something, use the use fetch hook, pass the URL endpoint that we want to fetch, and then it should fetch the data for us. And as you can see, nothing is missing over here. Everything is working perfectly. As you can see here, we have the data here. Now we can also go a step further and say that if loading, if it is loading, let's return an activity indicator from React Native like this, and the size should be large. Let's see what size is here. We have large over here, and then let's style it and give it a color. Does it have a color? I think we can. Yeah, we have the color prop, and then we make it red like this. Okay, so it's actually, the loading actually appeared for a second. Let me make it false so that we can see the loading over here. So you see, this is the loading. So whenever the data is being fetched and it is loading, we are going to see this loading indicator here, but it comes very quickly, so we don't see it. Okay, so yeah, it loads and then we get to see the data. And we can also do a similar thing with the error. We're going to say if we have an error, we are going to return a text in that case. We're going to say text, and then we pass in the error. We're going to say error, and then we pass in the error over here like this. Okay, all right, so that is when we have an error. So you saw the loading indicator, and then the data is being fetched here. All right, so this is basically a brief overview or a quick glance of how we can actually fetch data with the JavaScript Fetch API inside React Native. It's very simple, and you can use it to fetch any type of data you want. You can go a step further and make more queries with this approach. Now, one assignment that I would like to leave to you guys is that at this point, we've now known how to fetch, seen how we can fetch the data. We are making use of the data. We are rendering the data. Also, we are passing the error here if there's an error. And then we're also showing this loading indicator when the data is loading. Now, one thing you can also do is that you can add the pull to refresh feature over here, so that when a user pulls the data over here, you get to see some loading indicator, and then it refreshes the data. Let me give you a hint of how you can do this. I mean, in the previous episode where we talked about the flat list, we saw how we can actually add a feature like that where we pull to refresh, which is very simple. Actually, it's very simple to do this. So to leave an assignment, just so you practice what is going on, you can actually add that feature, and then you make use of this refetch function, so that whenever a user pulls, it refetches the data, and then the user gets to see the updated data. You see the loading indicator over here. Yes, so if you found this video very helpful, I mean, go ahead and then hit the like button, and also if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It helps this channel a lot, and it's going to make this content available to a wider audience, and then we are going to grow together as well. Thank you so much for watching up to this point. Catch you in the next video.